Hello, we are going to go ahead and get started. I think people are going to still be popping on because we had a pretty high number of registrants, but we only have a few people on right now. But I don't want to put you behind. I want to keep us on schedule for today. Um, I'm Megan Muty. I'm with Family Matters Parent Training and Information Center. And today we're going to talk about partnering with families to build special education advisory councils. And this is, lots of us have special interests. This is kind of my special interest. So I appreciate that you're on today and that this is an interest that you have as well. I'm hoping to provide you some information. I suspect that the folks that we have on today are sort of at different levels. Some of you may already have a special education advisory council in place, and some of you may just be exploring the idea of whether that's where you want to put energy and time. So I'm hoping to be able to answer some questions, give you some basic guidance, and connect you to some resources. Let's go ahead and it's been one of those days with tech, and it's going to stick with us, I think. Family Matters Parent Training and Information Center is not a legal services agency, so I always like to reiterate that please don't take anything that I'm going to provide for you today as legal advice or legal representation. If you have a legal question regarding anything related to special education, you can reach out to us and we will connect you to appropriate resources on that. If you have tech issues, try to use the chat box. I can try to pay attention to that. I don't have a second set of hands on board today. We typically have two folks on board. I do not have that today. So if I miss something, know that I'll try to get to it as soon as possible, and then use the Q&A for questions. And we'll do questions at the end if anybody wants to talk about specific scenarios. We cannot provide CEUs, but if you need a certificate of attendance, you can let us know and we can get that for you. There's not enough people on right now. We're going to revisit introductions here in just a little bit because I don't want to dig into that and then revisit it. Family Matters Parent Training and Information Center is one of two parent training and information centers in the state. So in the Chicago area, the 7 counties kind of in the circle around Chicago is Family Resource Center on Disabilities, and they serve families in that area. We serve families in the 94 counties below that area, so covering the rest of the state. I like to give you a little brief snapshot if you're not familiar with our program. We host an education advocacy helpline. We have educational support coaches available to families who are navigating special education. We serve families officially 0 to 26. Most of the families that reach out to us seeking assistance are families of kiddos age 3 to 22. That's the most common. And we can help navigate special education concerns, connect you to resources, help prep for IEP meetings, things like that. We do also hold the grant for the Educational Surrogate Parent Program in Illinois. If you're interested in that, please reach out. We are always recruiting educational surrogate parents. It's an important role, and it is difficult to recruit volunteers for that. And we'd love to talk to you more about it if you're interested. Compass is a program that is a little bit more intensive, provides education over a 10 course series, typically asynchronous at this point, so online, available to individuals who don't necessarily want to become educational advocates. Often it's parents or school staff members but want a higher level of knowledge about the special education system, terminology, common barriers, questions they should ask, participation in meeting, things like that. We address that more intensely over this 10 course series. So that should be coming up, we think, in July or August. Again, we're going to open it if you have an interest in that. We offer DAISY, the Data Educational Program, that is specifically targeted at training families to interpret educational data so that they can sit at the table and make systemic change in education. And that is going to be running in July this year. We do a lot of special education advocacy trainings, just like the one today. We do most of those via Zoom because that is participant preference, but we're happy to do in-person trainings as well. We have 2 self-advocate blogs, so 2 self-advocates who share their experiences and guidance. It's targeted at other self-advocates and families, and those are posted on our website. We do quarterly newsletters and what's called a transition news blast, so it's focused on transition aid students. And then we also do a monthly podcast, and that's all posted on our website. We do have a lot of resources available to families and educators at the site. So if you have some time, I would explore that. So the goals for today are just to talk about what family-centered practices look like, barriers to implementation in the school system, talk about what a family advisor is and what a family advisor isn't. This is one of those areas where we see schools sometimes get into a little bit of trouble with implementation. Uh, we're going to talk about strategies to use advisors well, and then key considerations if you decide you're going to move forward with building a special education advisory council. Family-centered care, the reason I talk about it, so historically I come from the hospital setting and family engagement, family collaboration in healthcare. And that's part of the reason why I love talking about this in the school system, because there are so many things that align well with how you can use family advisors in the school system in the same way that you can use them in the healthcare system. But it's focused on some core principles: transparency and open sharing of information, participation in planning and decision making, collaboration, and dignity and respect for families. So the idea is if you have families at the table in the healthcare system, that can translate into higher quality interventions, higher quality support, better communication, and families who are more satisfied with the outcome of services. And we want to see that in the school system as well. Those are things the school system values as well. The idea behind it is to transition families from recipients of supports and services to designers and collaborators in providing supports and services. And that is a big shift in the school system. We have traditionally been more than open to families participating as volunteers, helping in the classroom, helping with the PTA, helping in the lunchroom and recess and all those. And we want that. We want that to continue. We value that. But we also want to think about what would it look like and what would it mean to the system if we brought families to the table and started asking meaningful questions about their lived experience and how we can improve their engagement. How would it improve the system if we brought families to the table? The way that it started in healthcare is they did some very specific things. And I was lucky enough to be in healthcare right at the time when all of this was kicking off. And so I could really see what was working well, what caused a lot of friction, what was difficult to implement, and then what the payoff was when it worked. And so they started things like family centered rounds. And so having families present when the medical team came through and fully participating in that rounding process instead of getting a report of what was discussed during rounds. Participating in when one shift RN changed to another shift RN, being a part of that conversation and fully participating in that. Families being educators to new nurses and physicians and mentoring other families. And then families as advisors in process and design. When we had families there, we were building a new hospital, a large hospital, and families were right at the table on how that hospital was going to be designed. And you can imagine when schools are making those sort of structural decisions about this new school or this new building or how this is going to flow, having families at the table can be very useful. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is based on the dual capacity framework. And most of you have probably seen this, but this talks about how to bring families to the table and gives you sort of a logic model as to how you might do that. And I won't go through it all today because we can talk about this till the end of time, but I'm basing a lot of my guidance on much of the work that's been done around this. And so the first thing I would do, because I said, yeah, I think we've got probably a group of folks who have varying levels of experience here and may not even know what your interest is just ask yourself, one, am I at a number one? I'm very uncomfortable. I have not worked with students and families in this role. So maybe you work with student families all the time, but not in this particular capacity. Or you're at a two, where you're open to the idea, you see there may be some value, but you don't know how to systemically make it happen. And then three is very comfortable, have partnered with students and families in this way. I feel like they're a critical part of the process and really just would love to share more about that. Sort of assess where you're at right now. If the problem with this whole implementation is you might be ready, you might be thinking, let's go, let's do this, this will be so helpful. But you may have 8 team members behind you who are like, I don't know about the time commitment, I don't know about the payoff, I'm not sure that I want to engage in that way. It is really critical that you have a team of people who are at the school who say, yes, this is something I value and I'm willing to be uncomfortable and I'm willing to do this. One of the ways to do that is to do a family engagement assessment. And so I've put one here. I'm not going to link off because sometimes when I link off, it won't let me back on. But that will be in there and I will send these slides to you so that you can look at that assessment. But doing an engagement assessment is really helpful. It'll give you some perspective into what other people are feeling as you move forward. In order to sort of get, okay, is my school ready for this? Do I want to do this? You want to ensure you have some administration open to the process. There's no doubt about that. This is a top-down process. So this really isn't something that one passionate teacher can do alone. One passionate teacher can move mountains, I believe. But for this to work, it is a school-wide rollout. It does require administrative buy-in. So keep that in mind. It is a long game process. So really from the day that you decide, yes, I want to do this, to the date you have a functioning special education family advisory board, I would tell you to plan for about a year. That's about how long it takes. You need 2 staff members, really. You can say one, but 2 is really what you need, who are like all in, who they're the ones I often say who they're in the teacher break room and everybody's having lunch, and maybe there's some discussion around difficult families or a particular parent. They're the ones who might say, well, have you considered? Or, you know what, I had that family last year and this is what worked for me. They're the naysayers in that way who are willing to push back against maybe some of the negative discussions that sometimes happen around families, which are just a normal part of being in the school system or working with families. So you're looking for those folks. You might want to have people on this team who would take the time to attend other family advisory councils. We are seeing more and more of them pop out, and that can be helpful. Actually, ISB has a statewide family advisory council. That's something you can look into attending and watching. And then you want to put some time into designing a process that really can make change at all levels. If you're going to do it, I say do it all the way. And so think about how much time it might take, and it's worth putting in all of the time rather than rushing through it and then a year into it deciding, you know what, this isn't working. We've put all this energy into it. We're not going to continue it. In doing that, think about what barriers are going to be thrown in your way. So would it be lack of administration buy-in, or would it be maybe lack of educator buy-in, or do you not have enough families who you think you could engage in this way? Are there other things going on at the school that demand the attention of the staff team that this really doesn't fit into or align with? Think about what those barriers are as you start having these conversations. Now, also keep in mind that you're going to want to probably have some students, or another way to think about this is some students who have left your program, who have moved on, who are aged out, who are self-advocates with disabilities. That can really be a powerful part of this process. So we typically talk about families as advisors, but we also want to consider the self-advocate role in that. They bring their own lived experience, their personal vision of what it might look like when things were really going well, and knowledge of barriers they had in ensuring that they had the types of programs and services that they might have needed even 5 or 10 years ago. And then families can bring sort of consistency and culture to the board. They can describe things about what it's like to navigate the special education system, and also help educators understand what it's like to parent a student with a disability who's navigating special education. And that can be helpful insight. When we to families, and at Family Matters we talk to families all day every day, and oftentimes those are families who are having difficulty with system navigation, and what we find is there's certain assumptions that are made about families pretty frequently, a lot about this family's overly involved or overly engaged, or not involved enough, not showing up, not engaged. The feedback I get from school teams about the number of families they have who don't attend IEP meetings, and sort of the judgment that comes with that. And this is something that you can do to sort of try to address that and get to the bottom of why some of those barriers are in place. And a lot of those are systemic outside of the school system, as we all know. Assumptions that the family can't understand the complexity of the system. Special education is very complex. All you have to do is look at an IEP form to know that we have set up an incredibly complex system. And we can have people there available to help families navigate it all we want, but that doesn't change the fact that it's really tough to navigate. Some people feel like families have unrealistic expectations. I often hear this from educators who are working with students with complex disabilities. And there sometimes is a perception that families aren't realistic about the abilities of a student. But what we find is when we get to families to the table is they actually have a much more nuanced understanding of what their kiddo can or cannot do, but they want to participate more fully, and they can really add some robust sort of challenges to the system that can help us provide better services for those kiddos who may not be able to voice their own needs. Um, the family's difficult or hypervigilant, also super common with kids who have complex needs. Sometimes bringing those families to the table helps that simmer down a little bit and also helps all of us have a realistic understanding about what the family needs. Or the family's in denial about the challenges a kiddo might face, or today, or in 10 years. Um, I would argue that we're all in denial about the challenges and barriers that an individual student who has complex needs, who has significant school challenges, might face when they leave the school system. And I think we have to be really realistic about that so that we can prep them appropriately so that when they leave the school system, they really can navigate a complex social service system that isn't set up to support families in the same way that the school system is. The school system is designed to support families well and often does support families well. It doesn't mean that all families agree with the services or supports that are provided, but the system is designed to support families in a much more comprehensive and effective way than it will when a student leaves the school system. Families tell us there's certain themes around barriers they run into. Communication, so they don't feel like they're communicated with in a productive way, or they only call me when there's a problem. Families tell us that pretty frequently. I feel as though the IEP team is frustrated with me. There always feels like there's tension in the IEP. I don't want to go to the IEP meetings because I just feel like the team is frustrated with what I'm asking. No one returns my calls. I don't know what to do anymore. I leave messages or send emails. I think they're overwhelmed, but I feel left out. So maybe I don't feel welcome, maybe I don't feel communicated with in a way that is meaningful to me, or I just feel left out of the process. And a lot of times that's related to not fully understanding the process. And so it's difficult to really participate if you don't know what to expect and you don't know what's expected of you. In the school system, there's some barriers that we have just seen over and over again. The tendency, again, to provide for instead of with, uh, lack of consideration around diversity and culture and equity, assumptions about what families already know, uh, the tendency to see professionals as the only experts in the room. Um, I think we've seen some movement on that, but I think we still lean into that. And teachers are absolutely experts on teaching, and administrators are experts on running a school system. But parents are experts on their particular student, and we have to be open to knowing that and bringing them to the table and learning from them. Uh, Time is a huge barrier. Nobody has enough time, and I don't think anybody has less time than a classroom teacher. Limited resources, the school's going to choose where they put their time and energy and money, and this may not be it right now. Um, and then there is a lack of experience in including families and self advocates as advisors, and that's fair. There is a lack of experience, and that's what we're here for. So when we ask families, what would it look like if a school system was really centered around your needs? And they say we'd work together, both individually and systemically. I would feel like my kiddo's privacy is protected. We'd be included in the decision making about supports and services, not just for this kiddo, but how students with disabilities are supported across the entire school system. Um, Communication would be consistent and supported and welcomed. And that means I would feel welcomed as a parent to share my feedback, and I would be welcoming to you as a team member. Constructive feedback is not only welcomed and invited and valued. And then services are easy to understand. And I think that's part of our role. Part of our role is to help services be easier to understand for families, because we can't expect the school system to provide that level of support to families all the time, or to simplify how to navigate a system. But that's something that we can do at Family Matters. You want to find out, do the family experiences, and this is a key question in building advisors, do the family experiences and perspective at schools align with what the school thinks is happening at school? And that's tricky. These are not questions we ask very often, but it's interesting to find out sort of what school team members think is happening with families and what families tell us about what is happening for them or how they're seeing or feeling about a particular process. And that's at the heart of why you build an advisory board. So what we know families of students with disabilities need, this really encompasses it, that the systems change and grow as the family's needs change and grow. So over time and age, and we sometimes get stuck, particularly with students who have complex needs or have significant developmental disabilities. We forget that the family's needs are going to change and grow because we're focused so much on the educational needs of that student that we're not thinking as much as we would with a student who is progressing through the system in a different way. Families need to be encouraged to express their needs, and they need to know that they can tell us what they need to tell us, and we're not going to push back and challenge them every time. So families will stop telling us what they need if when they tell us, we push back. I've been in advisory board meetings where a family will kind of go out on a limb and they'll say, well, I wanted to tell you something that happened that made us feel as though we couldn't share an experience. And this is, and they tell us, and immediately the team says, well, that's not how we do it here. I don't think it would have happened that way. And so the family pulls back and they're not going to share again. And so you're really wanting to set up a system where families can openly share. You don't have to agree with everything a family says, just that you're open to allowing them to openly share. Where cultural and economic, social and spiritual differences are recognized and valued. Families are how to tap into natural community resources. One of the things that we work the most with families on is saying the school can provide this amount of service, right? This is what they can do. This is what they have the resources to do. This is what they're required to do. But you have an entire community that you can navigate outside of the school system. And students with disabilities often, especially when they're younger, aren't necessarily tapping into that because parents aren't thinking of that. They're immediately defaulting to services for students with disabilities. But it's okay to push on your community and ask for them to engage with everyone because that's what community is. And so sometimes providing parent support and doing that can help relieve some of the burden that the things the school cannot provide. Families want supports and services that are easy to find and easy to use. I have to use an example. If you have a student who's in transition age, so in Illinois 14 and a half, and up, and you start looking into adult services, and then you start talking to the family about it and explaining what it is, and 5 minutes into this conversation they're checked out or you're checked out because it's so complicated, so difficult, and the systems don't speak to each other at all. So like SSI is not speaking to Medicaid, not speaking to PUNS, not speaking to the Independent Service Coordination Agency, all of the things. Nobody's speaking to each other. But the family's having to navigate all of that. And nobody knows all the information. Everybody knows, like, somebody knows the ISC information. Somebody knows the Medicaid information. Somebody knows the developmental disability provider information, but nobody knows all the information. And so it's super difficult to navigate. And families want that help at all levels. And then they want access no matter where they live. So right now, if you're in Illinois and you're in a rural county and you have a student, for example, who needs a job and has a particular interest in working at a movie theater, for example, or an arcade or whatever, good luck accessing transportation that's timely and available and consistent. It's almost impossible in many areas. And that's just a tiny example of the lack of sort of equity in resources in more rural areas. And so let's say that I've convinced you that through all these barriers, it's worth working through, and you want to start talking about how it could work. You can break it down into three systems. You've got systems, service, and support. And so systems are sort of how families and self-advocates are included in the school. How are they involved in process and protocol design? How are they involved, like example, like in selecting curriculums, things like that? And how do you show families that you value their knowledge and experience? Like, how do you show them that? And then you've got service. So you have families in support of other families. So family mentorship. You have families in development of programs, and you have families as reviewers and advisors, things like that. And then you've got support. Families advocating for planning and design of an individual support. Families helping with decision-making around services and support, and then families participating in the evaluation of how services and support are delivered to them, to that particular child, their own child. So you can sort of see different levels of how that looks. A good way, this is a sort of a messy slide that I've done, but this sort of takes you through smaller one being sort of the lowest level of family engagement, all the way through the most significant level of family engagement and family advisorship. So one is that student just gets high quality support, right? They get good education, um, and they're supported at school appropriately. The next level would be the family is invited to share a higher level of information and preferences about their student. So instead of just an IEP meeting, maybe you're doing some person-centered planning with that student and family. And then the family is invited to participate on a family advisory board or a self-advocate advisory board. And I have to say those don't have to be two separate things, but it does have to be separate from something like a PTA. This is not a PTA. This is not that type of system. Um, and really hearing from self advocates, even if you don't decide to include them in this process, finding a way, for example, a focus group where you bring in self advocates who, have left that school within the last 5 years. You will learn so much about experiences, and it will really be an eye opening process. I've really seen great things come from that. And then next level, the family or self advocates invited to review curriculum, look at processes, and offer feedback regularly. So they're coming in, let's say, outside of a regular family advisory board meeting, and they're going to help look at a new math curriculum. They're going to look at a new implementation of programming for students with dyslexia. They're just going to look at the system at a little bit deeper level based on what that school needs. Because again, it's not the families designing. Your family advisors are not going to say, hey, this is what we're going to look at. The school system is going to say to the family advisors, hey, here's 5 things that we're concerned with, and we would like your feedback on these 5 things. So you have to be careful about what the flow is. A family advisory group is not designed for families to come and tell you, hey, these are the things that didn't work for me, and I want to address these things. The priorities come from the school and flow to the family advisors. And lastly, family advisors are integral to the program. Like, you can't imagine your school running without family advisors at the table. They're a part of hiring staff, sitting on school boards, advisory councils. They're always included in policy and process change, always. And that's a sign of a school that's really invested in engaging family advisors. They can be educators. And to me, when I think about this process, I think of like difficult things and then pretty low hanging fruit. To me, families as educators is it's low hanging fruit. It's a great place to start because you can essentially think to that like staff education day in August that you do. You can bring families in who have navigated the special education system, who are part of your school, and can say, hey, these are the things that are barriers for us. This is what we would like to see. This is what this experience is like for us at home. They can give you some perspective, and it's generally less threatening. Now, there's some rules around that I would give you outside of this, but it's a lower, sort of an easier thing to navigate. You can have families as advisors, like at the table in an advisory council. You can have them participating as volunteers. But again, that's a different role than an advisor. You can have them mentoring other families. Some of the best programs I've ever seen are schools who invest in training families to mentor other families as they come into the system. So families who have a new IEP, they are immediately connected to another family who knows how to navigate that system, who can help them read paperwork, who can maybe go to an IEP meeting with them, connect them to community resources. Basically, a family who says, hey, I've been there, I can do this with you, let me help you. And then you can have families reviewing policy, protocol, process, design choices at school. And if I asked all of you to sort of say, well, in what order would you rank these of importance, you would all give me a different order. But you can sort of see how, for example, a reviewer or a mentor might be further engaged, spend more time, more energy, need more preparation than someone who is reviewing a curriculum or something like that. Something to think about. And so we talked about how we divide those into levels of engagement. And I just want to give you some examples. So communication. So let's say families invited by an educator to design a system of communication that meets their needs because it's direct service. It's about their kiddo. So this is maybe for a school system who isn't ready for an advisory committee, but wants to engage families more directly. The system is evaluated and changed based on feedback from a family. So You're really going to dig into a particular process with a kiddo. A family is asked to define family. So we should never be defining family for a family. They get to tell us who their family is and what that looks like in the school system. And I would argue that should just be a standard part of engaging with families, but that can be, for some schools, an important first step in helping families share their preferences a little more deeply. Then you've got action. Families participate. This is another low-hanging fruit if you're wanting to engage families. Families participate in a facility walkthrough. They'll talk about functionality, construction, improvements that are needed. Again, you can have family advisors do that, and you are not obligated as a school to then write it all down and go back and find the money and do all those things. All you're doing is asking for feedback. So when they come on as an advisor, one of the things you'll do is you'll educate them on what their role is. And one of their roles is you're going to give us feedback, but you're not going to be a decision maker in that process. That doesn't change from what it always is. It's just, at the school board level, at the administration level, you're asking for feedback and guidance, and then you're going to decide as a school what that feedback and guidance is utilized for. Curriculum. Families review an upcoming curriculum on, this is just an example, soft job skills for employment, for potential job seekers, and offer guidance on things like wording, accessibility, and teaching strategies. Because that varies so much. And a lot of these families have particular expertise around these. So asking them to review a curriculum that's going to directly impact their kiddo can be really meaningful to them and can give you good feedback about whether that curriculum is a good match for your program. And then you've got more systemic things. So we talked about developing a family advisory board, which we're going to continue to go into. Family advisors, a select group of family advisors, meet regularly with staff to discuss policies, process, changes, and experiences. Or you use families as educators. We talked about that. Participating in staff education, sharing experiences, barriers, examples, and guidance to support staff in getting a better understanding of what families need. And so those are both, I consider, sort of higher level engagement, more systemic impact. And so let's say you do want to go further with this. First, you need to figure out what your current practices are. How are families, guardians, self-advocates included in planning and design of our programs, if at all, which is perfectly reasonable to say, right now, honestly, not really, not much. Or it's only at the school board level, and you're always going to have some parents sitting on the school board. So maybe that's, you're dipping your toe in it, but that's not an engagement of families in a way that is going to be systemically meaningful. Or how do you get feedback from families? So is it just a survey that you do once a year? Are families regularly invited to provide feedback, both at the individual, the classroom level, and the district level? And how do you do that? Do you do it in a way that's meaningful to them? So some of them want to do it online. Some of them may want to record a video and give it to you. Some of them may want to do it on paper. Some may want to participate in a focus group. Some may want to spend 15 or 20 minutes with an administrator and go through sort of a mini interview about their experiences. But how are you getting feedback about family experience? Because that will help you decide how to move forward. And then what systems are in place to use what you're getting from families into systemic planning and quality improvement in the school. So you can gather, and I have seen this repeatedly, schools spending a lot of time gathering information from families and getting good feedback that's useful, but then it just dies on the spot. It doesn't really go anywhere. And so the message that sends to families is, I don't know why I spent the time to fill out that survey, because I don't see anything coming from it. And maybe there are things coming from it, but we don't have a feedback loop built in to then go back to the families and say, hey, this is what we heard from you, and this is what we're doing about it. And that's really important to keep families engaged. And so think about, how do you use the current information you get from families, and how do you let them know that you're using it? Those are important questions. And so in getting this going, I downloaded this from Canva, and I can see I've got some issues. In getting this going, there's a few things you need to consider. And one of them is selecting advisors. So it's tempting. You have a family or two, let's say, who's super frustrated or irritated with a particular concern, or you have a couple of families in the community who have gotten together, and I support that. I'm all about families connecting to the families. I think that's great. But for this to work, this is not necessarily the best vehicle for families who are still working through things that they're very, very frustrated with. You need families at this table who can see more globally, who can see beyond their own experiences. They may have experiences that are frustrating to them, but they're able to be at the table and sort of look systemically at how families experience special education in the school system and look at it from that perspective rather than sort of stay rooted in the concerns that they're currently having. So that's critically important. Second, you need families who are willing to focus on the work of the school right now. So again, this is not a vehicle for families to bring in all of their concerns that you're supposed to solve right then. Now you're going to develop concerns based on talking to families and getting themes from focus groups like we talked about, or interviews or paper feedback or whatever. But the definition of what is going to be addressed in these advisory committees is going to come from the school, and it's going to flow to the family advisors. So if you have a family advisor who wants to work on one particular issue, this probably isn't the right path for them. Not to say that you shouldn't work with them on that issue, but not in this path. This shouldn't say sharing. They should feel comfortable using experiences for advocacy and change. So families often need a little bit of training on sharing their story and how to share their story in a productive way. We can help you with that. That's something that we do. So it's a powerful thing for families to know how to use their story, how to frame their story, how to tell it in a meaningful way. So think about families who either know how to do that or are open to feedback on that. And then, can families align with the mission and goals and vision of the committee and the school system as a whole? And so I say that again, just to really give you caution on, this is not the right committee for families who are still really enmeshed and working through serious concerns that they have. You need families who are on the other side of that and have a little bit more of a global perspective. And I know in saying that, that can be frustrating to families, but that's the reality of making a board like this work over the long term. Now, if you get families to commit as advisors to sit on a family advisory work group, it would be helpful for you to offer them a few things to make it easier. And I realize that this is a reach in today's environment. I absolutely, but I still need to say it as best practice. Things like childcare, offering them a meal, offering transportation. You're going to get a lot more of diverse experiences if you can offer transportation to an individual or two who would be more representative of the school system that you're working in, but maybe who can't get there. You can offer a stipend or a gift card. You can just offer public acknowledgement. Sharing in your newsletter about your special education family advisory board and what that looks like, and the fact that you're appreciating those advisors, that can be powerful and helpful. Before you go off to recruit advisors, there's a few things. Again, you want to find those 1 to 2 staff members who are consistent and are going to stay engaged in this. Consider how you're going to train your family advisors. To be honest, I would just defer and say, Family Matters, will you train the advisors? We're happy to do it. We know how to do it. But you can train your own advisors as well, and we can offer guidance to you about what might be included in training advisors for the long term and the most productive partnerships. Think about how often meetings would occur. Minimum, I would say a quarterly meeting is the most productive. Most families cannot commit to a monthly meeting. Every other month is maybe reasonable, but you're again looking at the long term. You want this to last and be productive, but you don't want it to be burdensome. And so a quarterly meeting sometimes allows enough of a change cycle, and maybe you're just attacking one concern or one project each meeting. That can be helpful. Consider where meetings occur. I get why school districts defer to the school. That totally makes sense. But if you could move it to a more neutral location or a more accessible location, sometimes that's productive. Who's going to establish those ground rules initially? Is it going to come from the school and flow to the board? Is it going to be generated by school team members on the board with the group? What do you want the ground rules to look like? And there's actually an entire guidebook on this, a special education parent advisory council development that I can provide to anybody who would like that really addresses some of this. What age range and geographical area do you want the advisory group to represent? It could be a program within a school. It could be an entire school. It could be an entire district or a county or a cooperative. There's a lot of different ways to look at that, and there's payoffs for each one, but you have to be able to address projects that really impact that entire area that you're choosing. So if you're just choosing the programs within one particular school, then projects are going to be focused on things that impact that. If you're choosing a co-op, which impacts maybe several districts in a particular area, your projects or focus is going to be bigger. And then how are you going to get feedback from families who aren't at the table? One of the things I would tell you as a family advisor, you're going to challenge those advisors to be representative of other family voices. So that's going to be part of their role. So again, best practices, childcare is available. You offer transportation or a stipend. All the information that you share with the family advisors is shared in plain language, which can be a real problem in special education. So be very careful that you're not using acronyms. Families get a base knowledge of policy and process around special education so they know what you're talking about. And sometimes they need to know a little bit of more about how funding occurs in schools. And especially now when there's a lot of talk in the community about funding impacts and things like that, you're going to want to provide some context for how projects are funded or how programs are looked at from a financial perspective, or where an administration is putting the emphasis based on resources that are available. Translate information. I can't encourage you enough to invest the time to translate information into native language for participants. Share agendas ahead of time. That's important. Make sure that you stick with roles, responsibility, and time management strategies that you've agreed upon as a group. It will make your meetings much more productive. And again, because families have limited time and staff is going to be doing this outside of their time, you want to just stay on task. But it will also help with things like when families are maybe wanting to overshare on personal experience, which is very easy to do as a family member. It helps the meeting stay on task. And that's an important part of this process. Decide whether you're only going to do online or only do in person, or you're going to do a mixture. I would generally recommend you consider a mixture because you will get more voices at the table. You're going to need some core agreements in place once you have selected family advisors. Confidentiality. So the last thing you want is a family advisor where you go into a family advisory committee meeting, you share sensitive information about a policy or a process that is changing, or some concerns families raised with you, and then that advisor goes out on social media and shares it. That will immediately kill your family advisory board. So I would encourage you to have them sign a confidentiality agreement and to speak to all advisors and staff members about the critical nature of you're not going to be able to be productive if everybody isn't in agreement that what is talked about at the table in terms of sensitive information is respected and stays at the table. You need people to participate. This is an area where I see groups struggle. So when they sign an agreement to participate, they are saying, I understand you have 4 meetings or 8 meetings a year. I will be at 3/4 of those. So I will be there. I will be participating. I will have reviewed the agenda. Set that out very clearly so they understand exactly what they're committing to. What's the role of outside community members? So can you have community members observing the meetings? Can they participate? Do they have other ways to share their voice at the table? Think about what you want that to look like. And then if somebody on the family advisory committee steps outside of sort of the norms that you have agreed upon, what do you want to do about that? And there's not a standard way to address it. The best way to address it is to have a very clear agreement ahead of time so that they know exactly what they've agreed to. So it's not as easy to step outside of those norms because you agreed to what those norms are as a group. Things you want to avoid. Selecting only families. This is an easy one. Selecting families who are already involved. You're already going to have parents who are part of the special education system, who are part of the PTA, who are recess monitors, who are at school every day reading to students, things like that. And you're going to think, I trust that family. I know that family. They'd be great for this. And they might. I'm not telling you they can't, but I'm telling you, if you have a whole advisory committee made up of those families, you're going to be missing out on a huge number of perspectives that would impact your program. Don't avoid training advisors. It's a huge gap that can really impact whether or not the board goes or doesn't go over time. Selecting staff members who are not really engaged in family buy-in, who really aren't kind of willing to follow that sword and say, this is super important, and I'm willing to go to battle for this because family voice really makes a big impact in the school system. You want to be careful when you schedule meetings. You don't want to schedule meetings at times that parents can't get there, but you also obviously have to be respectful of when teachers can be there. Maybe that means you're going to shift them. Maybe you're going to do right after school meeting and then an evening meeting and you're going to go back and forth. That is just going to vary based on what you decide to do. Try not to do too much too quickly. Let the group evolve and develop a framework for what it's going to look like before you start jumping into projects. Don't avoid that feedback loop. But like I said, whatever you decide to do with feedback you get, if maybe you decide we're not taking it on right now, then you go back and you say, thank you for sharing it, but we've decided this isn't priority we can take on right now. We'll revisit it next year. Maybe you completely change course on that inclusive playground you're building because the feedback you got from the family advisors was really powerful and you decided you were making some decisions that wasn't in the best interest of the school. So you go back to them and say, hey, these are the things we're changing based on what you told us. Whatever you're going to do, you have to have, sorry, because you have to have a feedback loop so that they understand how their information is being utilized. Again, you want that administrator buy-in to the point that that administrator needs to be at some of the meetings. They need to introduce themselves. They need to voice their engagement and why it's important to them and how it fits into the mission and vision of that school or program or co-op or district. And the last one is a little controversial. I generally would say you probably want to avoid using school employees as family advisors. So not that they don't have good feedback, not that they aren't parents of students with disabilities, but it puts them in a very difficult situation if you're really wanting to get strong, clear perspective that's clean, essentially, that doesn't muddy the water. You tend to get that better from people who are outside of the school system. There's certainly going to be situations where having a school member or a school staff member as an advisor is a good idea, but I'm just suggesting you use caution in making that decision. And talking a little bit about how everybody can add to this process. So the school community as a whole, things you need to ask is how does the district bring a spirit of collaboration to the table? How do we follow up, like we talked about, to family input? How do we show respect for opinions that differ from ours? And how does the structure and process of the Special Education Parent Advisory Council allow everybody to obtain information from with and from school leaders? Okay, so that's really sort of what the school community needs to be asking. Parents might ask themselves, how can I look beyond my own experiences? Do I think I can help my own child by learning about other people's experiences? And can I see that my participation, large or small, might contribute to a larger vision for what kind of services and supports we can offer students with disabilities within this program? And this is sort of things school leadership could ask themselves about whether or not you want to pursue this. Can I support families as they offer advice and guidance? Essentially, am I open to it? Am I truly open to it? What information can I provide to parents to help them look beyond their own experiences? Like, how can we give them a broader vision? How are we going to show families, again, that we value their experiences? What if families come to us are frustrated, angry, disgruntled about something? How can I encourage them to still share? And this is an important one, and that's why I put it in green. Does the district foster a culture in which parents feel supported and comfortable enough to speak freely? So what I'm encouraging you to think about is you have 3 parents who are struggling who meet at the coffee shop and they talk about policy and process and design and changes, but they never bring those ideas to the school. There's a problem at the school that those parents are not bringing those ideas. And that may not be great to hear. And it might be easy to sort of say, well, those parents could bring it, but there's a reason they're not bringing it. And so you want to answer the question, why are they not bringing it? And what kind of support and structure and sort of administrative backup can you provide to help that program move forward? A framework that'll work for them if they decide to move forward as a family advisory council. So these are common mistakes that I see when schools decide to do this, or parents work with schools to decide to do this. They don't provide staff education regarding expectations and goals. Again, I apologize. This is a downloading issue, so the format's a little bit off. All staff, not just the couple people that you're going to charge with facilitating this, all staff need to know why you're going to do a family advisory council, what value you see in it, and what you're looking to get out of it. It's a problem if schools are not super careful in selecting family advisors based on their interests and skill sets and what the school needs and the program needs. Be careful that those align. You avoid that feedback loop. That feedback loop needs to be in writing so you can't accidentally forget to follow through on it. You're not clear to advisors about what their role is. That's why I would have you sign that agreement ahead of time, really delineating this is your role, this is your time commitment, these are the boundaries of your role, these are the things you're agreeing to, and we could help you with that. Asking families or advisors too late, this is a big one, too late in a process to shift. So it's one of the things that we see these groups sometimes accidentally evolving into is like a reporting or an education group where the school comes to the group and says, let us tell you about this new curriculum we're about to implement. Or we're about to break ground on a new tech center that's going to be really specific to support the needs of students with disabilities. What happened is they forgot that the advisors are there to advise. So they should have been in that process at that table long before then. So it's not that you don't tell them those things, but just remember that you want their voice to be used for change. And if they get something so late that nothing can be changed, that's the opposite of what you're trying to do with the process. You also want to avoid, and this is a red flag, if I see this from a mile away and I can see that an advisory group's in trouble, and that is when the school starts using the advisory group more as like a parent group that they're going to provide education to. So they might call me and say, hey, can Family Matters come in and do the basics of special education presentation to my family advisory group? And if they did that in the first 2 meetings, I'd say, well, sure, because that'll give them the language and basic structure and they'll understand how it works if they don't already have that. But if they ask me to do that 6 months in or a year in, I would wonder why, because that's not what an advisory group is. It's not a group of parents that you're providing education to. They're there to give you policy and process guidance. And so if a group of parents said, hey, as advisors, we want you to come in and talk about parent school collaboration, that would make sense. But it's sort of the opposite of the traditional setup. And that sometimes it gets muddy if you don't have programs and policies and things that you're trying to target. So that's why you want to have that target in place. What are the things that we're going to want this advisory committee to work on? So that not before every meeting you're thinking, well, what are we going to talk about? And so then you think, oh, I'm not sure. I'll call Family Matters and have them do a special education. Those parents are not there to get education. They're there to be advisors to the group. And then asking families or self-advocate advisors for feedback on processes you can't change. So if there's a part of, for example, the IEP process that you are legally required to do because of IDEA, asking families how they feel about it, to be honest, doesn't matter because you can't change it. That's the process. And so you can certainly talk about the frustrations of that process, but you can't get feedback on it because that's frustrating to families to feel like I gave you feedback and you didn't do anything. And you say, well, I couldn't have done anything because that's written into IDEA. So that's just a simple example, but be careful that there's actually room for feedback if you're asking for feedback. Here's some more common pitfalls, and I'm going to send this to you. So if you haven't hung up, you're still with me, you're still considering it. Here's where I would start. I'd evaluate the current culture. How are families involved? Really lay it out. Are they involved in the PTA? Are they involved in volunteers? How are they engaged in the school system overall? About, are we ready to build an advisory board? Is this really where we're at? Are we ready to do this? Consider a book study to prepare staff. I could give you some book ideas about parent engagement that would be helpful to staff to sort of start having a dialogue, talking about parent engagement, maybe in a different way. Survey families, ask them about their experiences. And again, do that in a wide variety of ways so all families can participate. And then identify at least 1, but maybe 3 concrete projects that are that low-hanging fruit. So maybe you're going to just start a mentorship program. Maybe you're going to have families come and do some education to staff. What are some things you could start with that you're likely to have success with and that are not really terribly threatening, but could be very productive? Think about those sort of projects that are likely to go over well, and start there. So this is just a list of what other schools have done. So and part of the reason we have some knowledge on this is a number of states have laws in place that require schools to have special education family advisory boards. I wish Illinois was one of them, but we are not right now. But here's some of the things they've worked on. Staff training exercises, discussions around how we include students with disabilities in extracurricular programs. This is often a hot button issue. Drafting a mission statement, looking at a school survey and seeing how that school integrated special education topics into the survey. Providing a family training event. So maybe the family advisory committee is going to work with school staff to provide a broad family training event to all school parents. talking about before and after school programming and students with disabilities, having family advisors. This is a good one. Participate on hiring committees. I love seeing that. Have the family advisory committee go to the school board and introduce themselves and talk about their role. Talk about things like accessibility around the school. That's it's a little bit of a low hanging fruit, but it's not, because it does require money. So if you, I was talking to a school not that long ago where they had just built a brand new entrance, a nice brand new entrance. And a parent identified the fact that it wasn't accessible. And it was so disappointing because they had already put all of the funds into that. It wouldn't have been super helpful at that point. It did have to be corrected, but it may not be able to be corrected immediately. And but it does go to, like, gosh, if we had those students who needed the accessibility present at the table, we would have been talking about that and we wouldn't have missed that. So in summary, we've stayed on time, you guys. In summary, select advisors and group facilitators with care, provide training and prep to the whole school. But then you're going to provide very specific training to your family advisors to help them embrace their role, but stay within the boundaries of their role and to meet the needs of what you're setting out as mission and vision for that particular group. Establish a clear mission statement and make sure that everybody at the table is bought in. It would not be rare at all for you to bring family advisors. You've gone through, you've interviewed them, you've given them some education, you've brought them to the table, you're ready to go. And a family says, you know what, I don't want to do this. This isn't what I want to do. That's fine. Let them sort of fall off and you'll bring another family in, because you need everybody at the table to be bought in. Include school administrators at every step. Focus on small wins, document those small wins, and then evaluate at 30 days, 90 days, and 6 months. What is working? What needs to change? Because again, you're just learning and growing in that first 6 months. You don't have to have big wins. You just have to make forward progress, keep your momentum. And so those are some things you want to consider. And again, here's a little bit more about the work of family advisors. This is a video. I'm not going to show it today, but I will send it to you so you can watch it on your own. And I'd like you to think about, if we say we value family input, which we all do, and every school system does, we have to demonstrate that by putting it into measurable, sustainable action. And so we have to be willing to go beyond where we are right now. And that can be tiring, and it can require resources that we feel like we don't have. And sometimes it's energy resources by staff. But I think the payoff is huge when you do it well. And again, it's something we're happy to help you do if you have an interest in it. Here's some resources and tools that could be useful to you. And again, this will be coming to you.